Welcome to a DCLK webinar series, which today is on leading remotely. So DCLK, Bani, are you?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to.
That's okay, yeah, that's fine. Perfect. So DCLK, if you don't know what, that's Diversity Collective Lanka. We are a group of women and a few men as well, who are currently, not excluding men, that's not what we're about. But predominantly we look to empower and enable women through, we thought, to try and grow, and the fastest growing industry at the moment happens to be technology, which is why we currently work in this area predominantly. We do this to, I suppose, advance, connect, empower, and enable women. And we currently work in these 4 sectors, which is schools and higher education, where we get involved to influence what our girls can study, especially in technology. We help women navigate their careers, as well as we support women entrepreneurs who are interested in starting up their business or taking it to the next level. So just a bit of housekeeping to start off with. If everybody, I can see everyone's on mute already, but just to make sure that we're on mute, we will have time for questions at the end of the session. I think we're ready to go. I'll introduce our speakers for the day. So we've got Keshini Jayawardena first, leadership and performance effectiveness facilitator and coach. She's a consultant of the Bridge Partnership in Singapore, and she's also involved in the Center for Inclusive Leadership. Keshini, I will get you to introduce yourself or tell us a little bit.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Natalie. So yes, so I do a little bit of facilitation in these areas. I work with these UK-based companies. But before that, I've been doing this facilitation for the last 3 or 4 years. Before that, I really had a long career in the corporate world in Sri Lanka in banking. I worked for HSBC in Sri Lanka for 20 years, and then I spent another 12 years at Nations Trust Bank. I was in the top leadership team of both banks. I was the first woman to join HSBC's management cadre. But at NTB, when I retired, I was one of 3 women in the leadership team being led by a female CEO. So that was very empowering. So, you know, I have a lot of experience in the corporate world, which I will draw on a little bit in what we talk about today.
Thanks, Keshini. All right, next we have Bani Chandrasena, co-host for this evening or co-presenter for this evening. Bani is currently head of inclusion and diversity at the London Stock Exchange Group. She's also a board member and vice president of Diversity Collective Lanka, and currently a capacity forum lead for SLASCOM. Bani?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so I'm actually doing more of the question asking, I think, and Keshini is going to do most of the hard work here. But I will also be supporting, since I do a lot of work in diversity and inclusion in my day job. Primarily, I do diversity, inclusion, and well-being at the London Stock Exchange, but I do a lot of work at a national and industry level with capacity building and taking this conversation of especially gender diversity forward. So I will be talking about some of the experiences that I have dealt with in this space of leading remotely, and hopefully we'll give some examples to supplement some of the things that Keshini will be talking about. And let's get started, and let me hand over to Keshini to get the program going. Sorry, Keshini, give me a second.
No.
People are joining in.
Good.
Oops.
Yeah, okay, so the topic for this hour is, and we're just going to touch on things very lightly because it's not long and want to leave a little bit of time for you guys to ask some questions at the end, is really a very current topic, and it's about leading remotely. How do we now lead our teams remotely, because so many of us are working from home, no longer sitting in one office working together, but sitting in various places, some at office, some at home, etc. As a manager, how do you lead your team remotely? And one thing, I am going to draw on Bani's experience, because at the London Stock Exchange, they went remote back in March, and they still haven't gone back to office. So they have now got a lot of hands-on experience on the ups, the downs, the pitfalls, and the benefits of managing remotely. So I'll be drawing on Bani's experience to back up what I'm saying. And really today we're going to talk about 6 different areas. The first is inspire purpose. The second, trust your people, communicate, show them how, measure outcomes, and empathize. So those are the 6 areas we'll be talking about, and we'll go straight into the first one, which is inspiring with purpose to engage. So what one of the most powerful things that you can do as a leader or as a manager, actually, before I start this, I want to say all 6 things that we're going to talk about are things that a good manager will do anyway, right? Whether you're in the office or not, this is what managers should do. With remote workers or managing a remote team, you need to do it more, and you need to do these things more intentionally with more thought about it, right? So the first, going back to that, the first thing is inspiring with purpose to engage. And a lot of, I would say one of the most powerful things that you can do as a leader is tell people why they are doing something. Tell them what is the purpose that they are working for or working towards. What is the why? A lot of organizations and managers tell people how to do their work, but they very often don't tell them why they're doing it. And the Wi-Fi strength is, the further away we are from the signal or from the center, the weaker the signal strength can be. So the further we are away from office, the less we may really understand why we are doing something in terms of the whole organization. Yeah.
So
Bani,
so if I may dive in there, why does this matter so much in terms of how would talking about the why actually make such a difference, Keshini?
So when you talk about the why is, I think, how you really engage your people and keep them committed. Because when people know why they're doing something, their heart and their mind is caught, and they are working with purpose. While if they're doing something mindlessly or in a vacuum or in a silo where they really don't know how what they're doing fits in with the rest of the organization's purpose, or it can be very kind of disconnecting. And when you think about remote workers not knowing why they're doing something or not knowing what their organization is all about, it's probably very it's a very negative thing. And I think the newest issue and the latest challenge is, in the last 8 months, people have recruited people and they have started working remotely. So they have never come into the office, never seen what and why. So the whole, this whole thing about what are we about is really important.
So I can relate to that, because we've been recruiting all through the COVID since March.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the questions or something worth discussing is, how do managers actually try to connect? So if you think of the different job functions in a company, you do have things that are closer to the strategy, which becomes easier to explain and connect, versus there are much smaller jobs also. But managers kind of do need to try with all these jobs to try and connect to the overall purpose, because you can't only take the seniors along the way. You kind of do have to take all levels. And
so I like
do you have any
tips.
on that? Yeah, do you have any tips?
Yeah, sorry, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, Bani. I like to use the example of the purpose can be, as you said, at the very high level, the strategy or the overall vision of the company. Or when just now, when Natalie introduced DCLK, she said, we are about empowering women We are about empowering women in tech. We are about doing that so that we can grow Sri Lanka. So, you know, there's a couple of purposes there which might engage people if they hear about women, if they hear about tech, if they think about growing Sri Lanka on the world stage. But, you know, you can also talk about the purpose of your department. You can talk about the purpose of the project that somebody might be working in. You can talk about the purpose of the work that they're doing. So, I mean, I used to run huge operation centers at the bank, and I used to visit my staff and find people doing data entry all day and all night. You know, they're just entering data into a computer system. And I used to tell them, you know, your data entry and your accurate and timely data entry is key to us being able to deliver an efficient and satisfactory service to our customer out there in the branch. And for them to know that this little thing that they are doing has this big impact on the customer, for example, that is really inspiring to them. You may think you're not going to be inspired by doing data entry, but that was enough to engage a lot of people into what they were doing because they felt they were part of a bigger picture. I also, you know, in my years of working, I used to, especially when I took over new jobs, I used to very often, people would bring me things to sign or bring me, you know, stuff to look at. I would genuinely ask, why do we do this report? Or why am I signing this? And the person would look at me blankly and say, I don't know why, you know, it's always been done like that. So, you know, we think people know why they're doing something. We think people know what the department's function is. We think people know what the organization's purpose is. But very often they don't. And again, with remote working, you really need to keep that in the front. You know, you really need to say it.
I think another point I might add before we move on to the next one is about this whole social purpose and what companies have started doing. You know, simply put, when you think of the CSR activities and the causes that companies pick up along the way as passions and interests also are done, one, because they're good things to do, but also that is a good way to link the employees in the company to be connected with something that is not just about making money or the company, but doing something bigger and better in that sense. So those are all different ways, I would say, that help.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially for this younger generation. Right. So the second point is about trust, right? The future in work is about trust and not tracking. So with remote working, you can't any longer see your staff working. So many of us older fashion managers, you know, used to manage our people by seeing them in front of us working. Right now, they're working from home. You can't see them. You can't track them. A lot of organizations have tried to adjust to this by actually trying to bring in tracking mechanisms. So they have complicated tracking mechanisms. They say, keep your video cams on, you know, make sure that you move your mouse, or we can check how much time you have spent online, etc., etc. But the reality is that kind of working with that kind of methodology of tracking, it's exhausting and it's not efficient. And so I really advocate trusting and believing in your employees. The minute you start trusting them and you start with the premise that they are going to work, they have signed up for this job because they have come to work, not to skive off, it will impact how you treat them. And the impact and the way that you treat them will definitely impact their performance. I have very rarely found that when you trust somebody to do the work, that they don't do it, because yeah, I mean, so I find that, yeah, sorry, Bani, yeah.
Sorry, so the point I would bring is putting myself in the shoes of most managers, and when you think of the different industries, you know, managers who've been managers a long time, there is this saying that you have to earn a manager's trust, or you have, you know, even with parenting.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments there in terms of should it be earned, or is there a better way to do it?
I think there's a better way to do it, because I find that generally if you start off with trusting people is basically a form of empowerment. It is a form of respect, and people respond to that. People appreciate that. And they very rarely will want to let you down or breach it. I find that with kids as well. The minute you trust them to do something, as opposed to supervise them, you know, supervise all energy out of them, they usually will meet your trust. So I think that turn it around and try it, turn it around on its head and try it. It usually works. I mean, I've worked with hundreds of people. And when I moved from supervisory management to empowerment, I got such better results, really. And it was so much easier for me as a manager.
If I were again to put my manager hat on, sometimes the fear or what sometimes scares or worries a manager with all this freedom that we are suggesting is, trust is broken, people do exploit it. What can a manager do in a situation like that? Because you will have the one-off person who does not quite conform.
Yeah, true. So let's not pretend that it's all such a rosy picture. Human beings come in all shapes and sizes, all types. So when trust is broken, I think as a manager, the way I like to approach it is, first I like to actually find out. I like to be curious to see why the person has not performed as I expected. So rather than prejudging or jumping to conclusions or assuming the worst of them, I like to first ask them why, what happened, because maybe there was actually a good reason, right? So that's the first thing. Second thing is I like to show them the impact of their behavior. Because you were unable to do this or you failed to do this, this is what the impact was for me as your manager, or us as the team, or project in terms of its deliverable or whatever it is. So that rather than you point a finger at them and you make a judgment about them personally, you are actually talking about the impact to the work, which is, I think, much more powerful, and it usually maybe it will inspire less defensiveness. And then I like to ask them, this is the impact, what do you think you could do differently? So that's kind of a feedback model that I use, which is perhaps a little bit more effective sometimes than simply jumping on somebody or accusing them or being very negative, so that they have no opportunity to want to do better. But at the worst case, Bani, you're breaking somebody's trust, somebody's not performing and they're willfully not performing, continuously doing it. The last resort is always those HR, disciplinary actions, etc. But usually it's a last resort.
So are there any tips we can talk about today that would help a manager create that environment of trust from day one, so that it could be tips for a new manager in terms of how would you start this whole thing? I know we've been in remote working for a while, but in general, if you are feeling like you've been doing it not quite right and you want to start creating a environment of trust, and realizing that you kind of have to work with the employee with, in other words, you don't need to know everything, you just need to know the relevant things. What are some of the things that a manager could do to create that?
So, yeah, I think creating an environment in your team of transparency, of honesty, of being able to talk honestly both ways, right? So it's not just a one-way thing, but that you will be able to talk to your staff and they will be able to listen to you. Having that open culture, I think, showing your mutual dependence, acknowledging the mutual dependence. I need you and you need me, so that vulnerability on both parts, the fact that you're a team and you're vulnerable to each other, I think those things are what trust is based on. If somebody knows that your boss is dependent on you, they are less likely to want to breach that trust. If you have that sort of that open culture, that transparency, I think your credibility, your reliability, your emotional connection with your staff are all factors that go into building trust. And the other side of it is I always say, your self-orientation. So the more people feel that you are only on your agenda, that you only care about yourself, the less they will trust you. But if people feel that I am the boss, but I am on their agenda, I am on their side, I'm looking after them as well, that's how trust gets built. Yeah, those are just some of the ideas around building trust.
Thanks, Keshini. Let's move on to the next one, which is about listening and communicating.
Communication, yeah. So clearly, when we have gone remote, communication becomes so important, and communication in different ways. So I don't know, Bani, if you know this, there was a famous study done many years ago about the 3 V's of communication. You may have heard this, right? Which really, somebody did a study at Harvard many years ago and found that people communicate, and there are 3 V's. There's the visual, the verbal, and the visual, the vocal, and the verbal. And something like 55% of your message is actually usually carried across through the visual. When people see you as you say something, 55% of your message is communicated through the visual. 38% is communicated through the vocal. The vocal is your tone of voice, you know, the way you say something, whether it's fast or slow. And only 7% of the message is carried across through the words you say, the verbal. So it's quite astonishing to some extent. And clearly, when we have gone remote, we are really challenging ourselves around, say, that visual. You no longer can see the body language, you can't see the facial expression, etc. And a lot of the messages that we pass come through those visual things. You can't, perhaps if you're only talking on email or you're sending text, you no longer hear the tone, you no longer hear the vocal part of it. You know, are they laughing? Are they angry? Are they cross? Are they sleepy? You can't hear it anymore. And we see only the words if it's in a text or in a WhatsApp or in an email. So communication in all ways has become really a challenge which you have to work on. You need to communicate appropriately and clearly. You need to communicate constantly, because out of sight, out of mind. You know, your staff are remote. You forget about them. You don't touch base with them regularly during the day or during the week, and they think, oh, you know, my boss doesn't even know I'm doing this or I'm working. And the other thing of FOMO, you know, fear of missing out. People, when you don't keep in touch with them, they think, oh, everybody else is probably in touch with each other and I'm missing something out. So you need to kind of keep all those things in mind in terms of communication. I also like to say, use your different methods of communication for as appropriate. So if you have something quick to say, or you want to ask a question, you might like to just give a call. We've all become very lazy about picking up the phone and calling, you know. We'd rather just send a WhatsApp. But I think a call is useful. If you're giving personal feedback, it should be verbal, it should be with a call. If it is actually something complicated, or you're doing an appraisal and you can't meet each other physically, you're doing it remotely, you might like to video conference like we are now. If I was doing this where you couldn't see me, I think you would get a very different experience from actually being able to see me, though I am a little box on your computer. It's better than nothing, yeah. You know, use emails for short, non-contentious information exchange. Use messengers for like coordination, or Messenger or WhatsApp for coordination, group chats, etc. So we basically try to mix the mediums and use a medium which is appropriate to the message you're trying to give. Yeah.
So if you thought about it about a year or 2 years ago, where most of it was email, phone calls, walk across to your desk, all of a sudden the mediums exploded in terms of options right now. The walk across to the desk is the one that is reduced, but then you do have the you know, video conferencing. But within video conferencing, I guess one thing I can talk from experience is, you know, we don't always use all the options. Trying to get everybody to turn on their video sometimes can be a challenge. One-sided conversations, you know, they're only listening. The chat function sometimes is useful for engaging, but all of these become a little bit more of a challenge for the manager, since the manager is trying to find these other cues also, other than just the message. So I guess it just did get a little bit more complicated for managers, but I guess you could also look at it as you have a few more options if you can toggle and navigate through them, so that you could use the right one for the right time, which also means you can get to them. You want to talk a little bit more about the listening component when it comes to communication?
Yes. So, you know, one of the things you really have to, I think, so listening is such a key management tool, right? None of us listen very well. All of us we tend to listen to people, but we are listening to things in our head while we're listening to people. So this thing about actively listening deeply, is something that I think managers will have to develop more and more skills around their listening, because they are not with their staff. So, you know, sometimes You need to be able to pick up what people are not saying, perhaps, without the visual cues even, so you have to become all the better at listening. So listening and developing your communication skills, I think, key element in terms of management skills, especially with your remote team.
Any tips or discussion points around making meetings, conversations engaging when we're stuck in behind the screen and in a little box?
Behind the screen in a little box. Yeah. So I think there are things that you can do. I think a lot of people are suffering now from Zoom fatigue, where they're sitting in 2-3 hour meetings, Zoom meetings, etc., which can be really quite exhausting. So there are things as a manager which you can do to kind of make the meetings different. So there are, other than, there are lots of tools. I think you've introduced me, Bani, to a couple of things like Slido, where you can do polls and where people can communicate feedback, back into, so that you can use some sort of interactive methodologies. Or all these Zoom and Teams, they all have breakout rooms, so you can actually put people into breakout rooms to have a discussion or to work on a project or something. You can use two voices like you and I. So rather than me speaking for an hour, here we're doing it as a dialogue with you and me, so that people get to hear two different points of view. I would recommend that if you have regular meetings, you may often keep the videos off because of connectivity and stuff, but at least once in a while, everybody switch their videos on and see each other, because we're human beings. We like to see who we're talking to. So perhaps at the end of the session, in the question and answer session, I'll ask all of you guys who are listening in to switch your videos on, because it's much nicer for me to see who I'm talking to than to be talking to just a name on the box. Yeah, one of the things that I used to do in physical meetings, Bani, which I know you like and which I now use in these virtual meetings, is at the beginning of a meeting, when I'm the manager, at the beginning of a meeting, I just ask everyone, I say, let's go around the room and let's just see how everyone's feeling. Give me one word, how are you feeling right now? And we go around the room and people just say, I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling excited, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling hungry, I'm feeling sleepy, whatever it is. We go around the room and everybody checks in with their feeling. And it kind of brings everybody's energy into the meeting, into the room. It is a good way of touching base with people beyond just the work, which we're going to talk about at the end. So, things like doing that check-in, asking people what else is going on, perhaps. So all those things can liven up a meeting. It's also, I mean, Bani, you guys have been working for what, 8-9 months off, off site, as it were. So I guess even I think you do a lot of these stuff, but even some fun get-togethers, whether it's a quiz or departmental competitions, or just forget the work and occasionally have something which is just fun, where everybody can partake. I think I know lots of families.
I think you're right. That is one of the things that we've been doing. And we realize, like you said, human beings are social creatures. So then they also start associating these technologies with not just work, but it is a medium of communication. And that mindset is actually half the battle sometimes, because, opening the laptop for the whole 10 hours becomes kind of, it's all work. You associate your laptop with work, which can sometimes be difficult. And then, the whole well-being component comes. So we do a lot of other activities, whether it be, karaoke singing, all those kinds of things are all things that you can do. And thanks to all the apps, there are all kinds of ways to actually make it a lot more exciting than actually face-to-face also, in terms of, you have the music, you don't have to have the guitars. I mean, technology is amazing if we kind of use it right. Only thing, you have to be ready and open to try something.
True. Yeah. But yeah, communication can still be fun.
Okay, moving on to number 4.
Coaching. Yes. So now this again, at the beginning, I said a lot of organizations tell you how to do stuff, but they don't tell you why you're doing it. But I think that the how also, I think sometimes we don't realize how much we show people how they're supposed to do their work by just demoing it in office, so people learn by watching you, people learn by seeing what the guy next door does. Somebody, you're taking over from a desk and they show you all the pieces of paper, all the handbooks, all the whatever, and you teach them kind of on the job. Now that they are working from home, and Bani, if you're recruiting people and they start off working from home, how are they going to know how on earth to do the job? So don't forget and don't assume that people know how they're supposed to do it. So teaching, training, giving clear directions, telling them where to go if they have to resolve an issue, what are the fallbacks, where's the help desk, etc. Will definitely giving them feedback as they're doing well or not so well, giving them that regular feedback. So basically these questions: how am I supposed to do it? How do I do it? By when should I do it? In what order should I do it? Don't assume that everybody knows, and put your teaching hat on. When you're running teams remotely, just remember that you have to put your teaching hat on more than you might have had to if you were all in the office. You'll have to do it more intentionally. I think that's what I mean.
So this is actually especially challenging, I guess, when we hire inexperienced people. For example, we hire management trainees, we hire interns, and those ones, I think, are the ones who are suffering the most. One, the demand for it is a little bit lower compared to when we were pre-COVID, and also whether how steep their learning curve is. To be fair. And I don't think there's one right answer. Like you said, it is different depending on the job, depending on the style. But managers do need to still realize you can't avoid that component. In other words, you can't hire experienced people only just because we are in situations of remote working. So finding that solution and being maybe very much more organized, planning better, etc., might be a few tips that would help. To get it jump started, if I may say so.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I am hoping that there's no doubt that we are human beings are social creatures, and that we do interact and we do learn and we do perform best when we are together. That's what we are. So I'm really hoping that a lot of, now, I mean, I'm doing a lot of teaching, a lot of training visually in the last few months, doing not visually, virtually in the last few months. It is okay, it's amazing to me that the message gets across, but I still know that I was more effective when I was in a room with people and we were doing exercises and we were trying things out and stuff. So I do hope that at some point we can go back to a fair amount of face-to-face interaction, a fair amount of face-to-face showing, role modeling, teaching, etc. But the reality is, I think this has been a watershed year for the way people work. And we are going to have to be able to do more and more remotely. And we're going to have to be able to show people how to do stuff remotely. So I think, again, as a manager who knows how to work with a remote team, manage a remote team, teach his staff at a distance, etc., his or her staff, is going to be, that's a modern management skill, and they're going to be marketable if you can do that, right? If you can only manage in a physical environment, you're going to be out of date. So, this is something that's really important for managers. This is a skill people really need to pick up on.
I'm going to go one step further and say it actually needs to be, the skill needs to be, the new skill we're talking about is a manager being agile enough to be able to work remotely as well as work face to face. Because I think what COVID tested for most companies is their business continuity when situations like this happen. And okay, COVID might have been longer than most other disasters or situations that companies have been faced with, but being able to switch into a remote mode for a month quickly and be effective during that month, switch back into part-time remote working, which I think is the way the new order is going to be, which means the agility to flip between the two and almost make it seamless will be the skill.
Yeah, I think it's an essential now. It is definitely essential. It is not a temporary measure anymore. it's going to need to be a skill.
Yeah, and I think the point I want to make there is because when I've spoken to lots of people in general, and I also hear a lot of things of people postponing, saying, no, we'll do that when it goes back to normal. And I think that is a recipe for disaster, because the future is going to be not what we had pre-COVID. It's a new world. So it was pre-COVID, there is COVID, and there's going to be something else. It's 1, 2, and 3. So waiting for that and expecting things to go back to the old way might not necessarily be the best mindset to have. And, you know, this goes into, I think, working as much as how you manage your family, to how you manage your household, etc.
Yeah.
All of that.
When you think about children being asked to learn through Zoom, it just shows you that this whole teaching showing is moving into a whole new sphere. Yeah. You know, so yeah.
Okay, let's see next.
Okay, so the fifth area that you start needing to think about when you're managing remote teams is measuring outcomes, right? So, you know, working 9 to 5 is out. It's the old-fashioned way where you clock in at 8:30 and clock out at 5, and you think that people have been working in that time. And measuring work by the task completed with quality is really what we are now looking for. So, you know, it's like asking, what is working? Is working putting in the time, or is working putting out the outcome, really? And that's what we're really saying. As managers, you need to move away from assuming that as long as somebody is at their computer for 8 hours of the day or has come into office for 8 hours of the day, that they have been doing productive work. And you need to be setting KPIs and stuff that people understand. It's this result that I want. I don't really mind how long you took to do it, how quickly you did it, how slowly you've done it, but I need it in this quality at this time. And that's all I'm going to be interested in. And I think that is a bit of a shift from the traditional old-fashioned way of management, where people just came, sat down at a desk, and actually we had no idea whether they were really working or, you know, doing something else completely. But we assume that because they were there, we call that working, but that's not it anymore. So managers of remote teams, you really now need to, it's quite a challenge, but you need to set out what is it you want, set those KPIs. So it's actually a little harder for you to do as a manager, set those KPIs and make sure that they are communicated so that people know what it is that you expect out of the job.
I think that brings a point that brings a point about, again, why communication is so important. So it's not one way. You're not just telling somebody this is what you need as an outcome. You need to make sure the other person totally understood what it means, and they understood it in their world, the way they understand it, because sometimes the biggest frustrations actually become that. Now, when it comes to outcome-based versus tasks, listing tasks versus outcome-based, that is, I think, a new way in general, nothing to do with remote working. It was shifting towards that. But again, if you don't communicate clearly enough, reiterate, get confirmation that the person understood it, it becomes a bit, you know, it can fall short.
So this is probably one of the hardest things that needs to be done, figuring out what are the outcomes, documenting them, sharing them. It's actually, it involves a little bit of hard work. You know, those days being, you could be a little bit more lax about things, but getting this really crystallized involves a little bit of hard work from the manager. But once you've done it, you know, it's pretty much smooth sailing. I always believe that you put a little hard work into setting things up properly, and then you can sit back a little.
So would that be why you would call it a better management style compared to the old way?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a better management style. And I have often now really found that, you know, rather than sort of cracking the whip and making sure people are working, and that, which was very energy sapping for me to be a manager like that, telling them what I want, when I want it, and in what quality I want it, and then just leaving it, or making sure that I'm there for them to check in with me if they need help along the way, but basically expecting that it will come, has usually reaped the benefit of, yes, it has come, you know. And I haven't really worried about whether in between they went shopping or had a long lunch or whatever, provided the work was done. Earlier, you know, you sort of hair stands on end because somebody hasn't come back from lunch for 1.5 hours, but it is a waste of energy when you think about managing in that kind of way.
What kind of advice would you give a manager who's a little bit more on the taskmaster style, who needs to adjust to this new way that we are suggesting?
Yeah, so it is a challenge to move to this management style. So as I said, one is you have to have the discipline to sit down and figure out what the outcomes are you want, write those KPIs. You need to be organized yourself, so because if you are disorganized, you will tend to, that disorganization will tend to go down the department, as it were, and make it difficult for other people to fulfill their outcomes. And I think you kind of have to respect people's time, so there are managers, I think there are people now working from home who are complaining that they seem to be working all the time. So it's no longer even that they're working from 9 to 5. They seem to be working from 9 till midnight because people have forgotten what time people should be allowed to clock off. Managers are perhaps because they themselves are not organized. They're suddenly calling at 8:30 or 9:30 in the night and saying, "Can you do this? Can you do that? Or what about this question or whatever?" So I think being organized, respecting people's time, setting those KPIs clearly out, um, are all things that managers will have to learn to do, as opposed to just being a taskmaster.
So I want to bring one point up here, going back to my world when you are managing many people, there is, I would say 60%, which is planned. There is an element of unplanned work also that continues to come. But I feel, if I may offer a suggestion, is the ability to kind of have frequent meetings, update conversations with individuals, with groups, which is running like clockwork. And what I mean by that is the frequency that you meet and you get updates from your team is on a cycle, so that, and the cycle is often enough so that when unexpected things come, they don't have to disrupt everything. If they can catch you between meetings, great, but there is always the chance that's not possible because there's so much happening. But then you bring those unexpected things into the next meeting and make those priority for that agenda, so that you are creating, I guess, order even within chaos.
Absolutely. I think that regular clocking in or checking in or touching base is very important. So measuring outcome is not about saying, this is what I want and I don't want to see you until it's done. It is about checking that it's happening along the way. But you're measuring the work and not measuring the hours that people are clocking in,
So, I mean, one good way to do that is, if there's an outcome you want to get done, make sure you have a few milestones on it and both parties are clear on what those milestones are. Okay. We have the final one, which is favorite. Empathy.
Yeah, it is about empathy. Empathy is really understanding how somebody else feels or putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. And I think being empathetic, especially when you're managing a distant team or a far-flung team where we don't spend time together, it has to be worked at a little harder, because when you are together, empathy usually builds almost naturally because of that human social aspect of ours. So when people are away, you have to make a little more effort at building this empathy. So, I say make your relationship with your team not only about work, but about life as well. So you have to build some social bonding, which is essential to that feeling of belonging or inclusion, the sort of work that you do with Bani. People, to feel included, people have to feel that other people understand them, the boss understands them. So I think this is something I really can't emphasize enough in terms of creating that empathy and checking in with people's feelings.
So let me ask you a question about, this means you do need to ask questions at a personal level, inquire more than just around work. Is there a level of unprofessionalism that can creep in if you're not careful?
So there's a fine line, in terms of building empathy means getting to know people better. So that whole thing about asking questions about how are you doing, how's the family, how are you coping with lockdown, getting to know people beyond just the work. But there's a fine line between which you must not cross, which is between becoming too personal, too nosy, too inquisitive. Empathy that I'm talking about, the social bonding, is getting to know your people at a slightly deeper level than just the work, so that they realize that you don't treat them like a utility, that that they are people with stuff going on around them. But you will have to figure out at what stage you hold back as opposed to treading too much into private space. And I can't even give you the formula, because with every relationship it will be different. You can be much closer to one person because they invite it and you invite it, and somebody else may be naturally more reserved, and you will know that you have to keep give them a little bit of breathing space. So all those things it will be different in every partnership and in every team that you have. But keeping it entirely work related and very cold and clinical in the work from managing remote teams, is going to be actually you're going to lose the engagement of your people. So you need to work a little bit harder at it.
And I think this particular point, empathy, well-being, all of that is kind of what tends to scare managers most from my experience, because it's sort of new and it hasn't really been taught that much. This is all new teachings. And also this is kind of where it can get messy. And I don't mean messy by being unprofessional, that you might be making the wrong call. You might ask too many questions. Somebody might not be comfortable. But I guess what I always have urged managers is you have to try. It is going to be a little uncomfortable, but you do have to try, because this is the new way a manager is meant to be. These are management skills we're talking about. These are not, nice to have skills. These are the needed skills. And if you can master these, you become a lot more marketable. You become a lot more productive. You become a lot more valuable as a member of the company.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Bani.
So how can a manager observe that an employee might need some emotional help when you are working with them remotely? So it is tougher. Any tips on what would be telltale signs that a manager should be looking for to try to understand that there might be a problem and they need to get involved?
Yeah, so this is very tough, especially when you can't see people, because when people come into the office, sometimes it's very clear someone is upset, someone is not in the right frame of mind. You can say, Masang, you don't seem well, you don't seem good, something's wrong. But when they're remote, you're going to have to make that extra effort. So again, I think what you talked about, having those regular check-ins, putting the video on and talking to each other face to face, having check-ins which are not always about work. So we talked about having meetings where you have them because you're working on a project or something. But sometimes you say, okay, let's Monday mornings or Friday evenings, let's just meet for a chat. How are things going? How are things fitting? How are you managing the lockdown? How do you cope with the family all around you? How do you cope all alone? And you actually have those one-to-ones on a scheduled basis, perhaps, and not only when they ask you for it. Because some people might be truly disturbed and not ask you because they feel something is wrong with them, So you set it up in advance. And you talked about, this is the modern way of management. This whole story of EQ, emotional quotient, is one of the biggest skills now that managers need. And if you're managing this new generation of Gen X or millennials or whatever, the old-fashioned ways of doing management where you didn't have to have this empathy, they won't work anymore. I've found that, so really need to build that. Bani, I'm conscious of time. Do you want to open up for a few questions?
I actually just typed in saying if anybody has any questions to type it in, or actually unmute and speak.
Unmute.
That's fine too.
Hi, Bani.
Hi.
Minori here.
I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see you guys.
Nice to see you. I think we should
Hello. Yes, you see one face. I mean, my Wednesday best today. No, just wanted to say that I really, I guess what was shared today really resonated with some of the things you're doing. So yeah, just bit of an introduction. So Bani and I have worked together in the past with some of the DCLK initiatives, but I do some of the diversity and inclusion and well-being initiatives for our Asia business where I work. So to acknowledge some of the things you said, especially about putting things off, I think companies and organizations recognize that it's a lot of effort to actually take something that's been delivered face-to-face, do it online. And that's been my experience, right? The logistics involved of coordinating, having a facilitator and administrator, like it's a lot more than trying to do it organically face-to-face. But so I think it's really, it was great that you acknowledged that. But the beauty of it is in that it doesn't have to be done, like you don't have to postpone things. You can actually be really innovative with how you just have to think a bit outside the box. And I think if leaders can encourage that, so we actually did a very traditionally delivered face-to-face training that's on mental health first aid for leaders. So this is to, to help with them identify, how to have some of the conversations, how to identify, I think, some of the not so obvious cues that somebody is struggling, right? Very much delivered face-to-face. I mean, even with the vendor, we had to go through a massive negotiation for them to get us, for them to trust us to say we can do this virtually, right? Because interesting enough, I mean, this is, we're giving them money to do the course, but because they're so passionate about the quality of it, they were so worried it'll be compromised. But we were like, you know what, let's test a session out, right? And see what it goes. And if it works, we can deliver it better or change it. So I think just small steps as well really helps. I just wanted to really acknowledge you for calling that out. So that's doing things differently online is fantastic. Yeah,
so that's a really good point, Minuri, because I think you're right. Even vendors struggle with this. Like Keshini and I were struggling with it today. But some of the things that we have, at least I have done, because I want to make 2 points here. One is the engagement levels have actually improved for when I think of DNI and well-being in LSEG over the last year when we've converted to virtual. But I think one of those reasons is also, obviously we are learning quicker because we are doing more and more of it. So what happens is we offer that as a service, like Minuri mentioned, in terms of we would have the administrator from LSEG who would actually help the vendor deal with it, so that the confidence level and the comfort level is as good. And that means the quality of delivery and engagement also becomes better than having, first timers trying to do it all the time. We have failed also by trusting people and not people being not ready enough. But I think those kinds of little cues of having those enablers support, spending a bit more effort on the administrator more than anybody else, I think makes a massive difference. Okay. I don't see any other questions, guys, before we just wrap up. I know we have about 5 or 6 minutes left. Can I assume everybody who's on the call is working remotely, or are lots of people back in office also?
Still working remotely, 9 months and counting.
My goodness.
Well, that is an upside, Minuri, like you mentioned, because it's not just home and office being in the same city, it could be across countries too. The mobility,
absolutely. Yes.
Work becomes a lot more possible. Okay, let me try to now go back to my presentation, which is going to scare the hell out of me. Let's see, share screen. Oh, I did it. Great.
Very good. Yeah.
I think. Okay. Okay, let me just then wrap up. This is just talking a little bit about Diversity Collective Lanka. Like Keshini and like Minuri, we have lots of others also who are now stepping up, wanting to get involved and helping with training, etc. So one of the things that DCLK is doing is connecting corporates with all these different trainers who are available and are keen to get involved, because this conversation, especially in companies, is not easy, and there are many levels to it. So some of the programs I've listed out here, not limited to, things like Introduction to Inclusive Leadership, Accelerating Gender Diversity, Scrum Ambassador Certification, Agile Working, Personal Agility, and like the program we did. So what you saw today was a kind of a glimpse to the kinds of programs that Diversity Collective is offering and is available to connect with these trainers like Keshini, like Minuri, for bigger programs that you require for your customized audiences in your company. There is another element. We have the contact details here. There is ability to join the network, DCLK, as a member, so that you can volunteer and get involved in the different pillars that Natalie spoke about at the beginning. So we do a lot of conversations and engagement with schools, with teachers, with students, especially with STEM subjects, etc. We do work with the higher education in terms of university students also, because we find the earlier and earlier you can have this kind of diversity conversation and talk about unconscious bias, etc., empowering even the younger, they are better set for dealing with some of the realities that are out there, which is not always on the side of the woman in this case, because of culture, because of how companies have been organized. But the more we can talk about it, the more we can get both sides comfortable. And when I say both sides, the company, the individual, the managers, the men, the women, I think the better we can make the environment for the future. We lost Natalie. And then what I also want to just highlight here is there are many options if you want to get involved with DCLK. So you can subscribe. We have most of our material right now that we put recorded, and we have a YouTube channel. We also advertise on Facebook about everything that we're doing, so that people can follow and keep track. You can get involved in events and special features that we do. For example, we're doing something called 1,000 Voices. We're getting messages of diversity and inclusion from anybody who wants to share their message, and that's also on our YouTube channel. And then for corporates, an opportunity to join as a corporate member, so that you can actually get the consultancy and support in taking this journey of D&I in your companies. But also, if you want to start small and maybe get involved in one sponsorship, do one thing, get your employees involved in these kinds of free sessions, public webinars, all I think is good first steps towards actually having this conversation, because this is not a short game, it's a really long game. So, you know, every little thing that's done is really important. So I'm going to leave this here just because we have the email contact there, diversitycollectivelk@gmail.com. You can reach out to any of us also if you all know us to learn more about it. And we hope you found this session on leading remotely useful. If you want to follow it again, it's on YouTube. If you want to encourage someone else to watch it, please go to YouTube, the YouTube channel, and you'll be able to pick it up. Thank you. And I guess we're on time. It's 7 o'clock. And thank you for joining Diversity Collective Lanka for the session today.